Full disclosure about today's show. I discuss a sensitive religious icon that may upset some viewers. The intent of today's show is to view Jesus as a man instead of Jesus as Christ. Viewer discretion is advised. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Get Real with Michael Atencio. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that has captivated the minds and hearts of millions across the world for centuries. It's time to examine the man, the myth, the legend, Jesus Christ. Was he a man of extraordinary compassion and wisdom, or was he the divine Savior who performed miracles? Let's take a journey to find the truth that lies beneath the layers of sensationalism. Now, I'm not here to debunk anyone's faith, but I am here to provide a fresh perspective, to peel back the layers of myth and legend, and to reveal a more human, relatable Jesus. You know, the guy who would have hung out with you at a party and turned water into wine, because, let's be honest, who wouldn't want that superpower? But on a more serious note, let's dive into some of those famous miracles and examine if they were, in fact, divine acts or just extraordinary events that got a little PR boost. Let's start with one of the most well-known miracles, the feeding of the 5,000. As the story goes, Jesus took 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and managed to feed a crowd of thousands. Now, I don't know about you, but I can barely stretch a pizza to feed 6 friends. So what's going on here? Well, some historians and scholars believe that this miracle was more of a lesson in sharing and compassion. Instead of Jesus magically multiplying the food, he may have inspired the crowd to share what they had with one another, and as a result, everyone had enough to eat. It's a beautiful story of community and generosity, and it doesn't require any divine intervention to make it remarkable. Next up, let's talk about Jesus walking on water. Quite a party trick. Right? Well, as it turns out, there's a scientific explanation for this one. There's a phenomenon called springs ice, or water lenses, where freshwater springs flow into a body of water and create a thin, buoyant layer of ice on the surface. This can give the appearance of someone walking on water when, in fact, they're walking on a fragile, thin layer of ice. It's possible that Jesus knew about this phenomenon and took advantage of it to teach his disciples a lesson about faith. So, instead of a miracle, we have a clever teacher who knew how to use nature to his advantage. Or there might have been flat stones beneath the surface he was walking on, and from a short distance it appeared like he was walking on water. If a person expected miracles, they would interpret this as a miracle when in fact Jesus was trying to avoid getting soaking wet. Now let's talk about one of the most famous miracles of all, the resurrection. The idea of Jesus rising from the dead after being crucified is the cornerstone of the Christian faith. But is there any way to explain this miracle from a more rational perspective? Some theories suggest that Jesus may not have actually died on the cross, but was instead in a deep state of unconsciousness, a swoon or a coma. The cool temperatures and spices used in his burial could have aided in his recovery, leading to his eventual resurrection. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely what happened, but it's an interesting alternative to the traditional story that's worth considering. As we continue to examine Jesus' life, we see that he was a man who cared deeply for people in need. He healed the sick, comforted the grieving, and stood up for the oppressed. In many ways, Jesus was a social activist and a champion for the downtrodden. It's easy to see how his acts of kindness and compassion could have been elevated to the status of miracles, especially when you consider the power of storytelling in ancient times. Take, for example, the story of Jesus healing a blind man. It's possible that this healing was not a literal restoration of sight, but rather a metaphor for the man gaining spiritual insight or overcoming a personal obstacle. The ancient world was full of allegories and metaphors, and it's not uncommon for stories to have multiple layers of meaning. Another perspective is that Jesus may have had some knowledge of medicine or healing practices of his time. Some suggest that he could have applied a mixture of natural remedies or used techniques like pressure points to help alleviate the man's symptoms, giving the appearance of a miraculous healing. We can't know for certain what actually happened, but it's important to recognize that there may be more to these stories than meets the eye. One thing we can't deny, though, is that Jesus was a man with an immense capacity for empathy and compassion. He consistently reached out to those in need, offering comfort and hope, and challenging societal norms that left people marginalized and suffering. Whether or not he performed literal miracles, it's clear that his actions and teachings had a profound impact on those around him and continue to inspire millions today. As we've explored today, there are many ways to interpret the stories of Jesus' life, and it's important to recognize that even if some events have been sensationalized or mythologized, it doesn't take away from the core message of love, compassion, and social justice that Jesus embodied. By examining these stories from a more grounded perspective, we can better understand the man behind the legend and appreciate the true power of his message. So there you have it, folks. Jesus Christ, a man of extraordinary compassion and wisdom, whose life and teachings continue to inspire and guide us even centuries later. Was he a divine miracle worker, or a wise teacher who knew how to use the world around him to make a lasting impact? In the end, maybe it doesn't matter. What's important is the legacy he left behind and the lessons we can still learn from his example. That's all for this episode of Get Real with Michael Atencio. I hope this discussion has given you some food for thought and maybe even sparked some interesting conversations. Remember to always question, explore, and never stop learning. Until next time, stay curious and keep it real.